it was a view that I was not familiar with. It didn't look natural. It certainly didn't look normal. I looked out and I saw an empty church. And I had to preach. Yes, preach like I'm doing right here with you right now, except that it was early in the pandemic and I found myself having to do this thing that I was not familiar with. And it was so weird. It was so strange. It really took a while to get used to. In fact, even as I'm doing it right now, I'm not used to it at all. I really rather proclaim a word in front of you with the pews filled with folks, with the songs, with the music, with the encounters that we have with one another. You know, like seeing each other's faces and all those things. Yes, normal. But the reality of it is that things are not normal. And I remember early in the pandemic, we would constantly kind of see one another over Zoom or call one another on the phone or text one another and say things like, I wish things would go back to normal. Normal. That which we are used to. Normal. That which we are most familiar with. Normal. That which explains what our experience has been up to this point. Normal. And then things continued. We're still in this place that is not normal. But now we recognize something. I recognize something. That some things are never go back to normal. And in fact, normal might be a relative term to begin with. Yes, certainly it's what I'm used to and what you're used to, but maybe what you're used to and what I'm used to are different things. So we are learning and recognizing that even the idea of normal, it's different for everybody. But there are some things that we are hoping to recover together, right? So we are shifting our language and saying, what does the new normal look like? This is part of new normal. So yes, even though I wish I was standing in a sanctuary with all of you proclaiming this sermon today, and by the way, you'll be able to do that too. This thing we're doing here, this proclamation moment through this medium, it's going to become part of the normal, and that's a good thing. Finding new ways to communicate with you and with a world that is so hungry for good news, it's a really good part of the new normal. The question is, what do we do in the interim? In other words, what do we do as people of faith in this in-between place that we find ourselves in this place where there's seemingly a threshold, with this place where there seems to be chaos all around us, uneasiness, disease, uncomfortableness. What do we do now? Well, I have good news in the midst of the struggling news. And that is that we've been here before. Yes, humanity has been here before. In fact, we have been here over and over and over again. It's such a common place to be, this place of uneasiness and chaos and disease and struggle and strife and seemingly like the world is coming to an end. It's so common to the human condition that when we read the first chapters of our sacred text, the Bible, we read that in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was in chaos, formless. It was in a void. And in the midst of that chaos and that void and that formlessness, God moved. Yes, God, the creator one, God, the one that we proclaim each and every week, God, the transcendent one, that's the fullness of love and compassion and justice and peace. Yes, yes, God moved in the midst of that chaos and began to order and reorder, create and recreate. Out of this mess that the world creation, lack of creation was in, God made something new. Early writers of biblical studies tell us that actually these stories in early Genesis were stories that popped up in the oral tradition of a people that were in exile. In other words, they were going through a really difficult time, and in the midst of that difficult time, they began to tell these stories of hope and possibility and imagination. And so, in the midst of our own place, in the midst of a situation where we find ourselves in the midst of chaos and disorder, we feel out of place, we might practice this hopefulness. We might remember that God, it's in the middle of it, and God comes in and begins to create possibility for a new normal. Maybe a normal that includes a more just, a more whole, a more loving community. Maybe a new normal that is shaped into a kinship among people that normally would not find kinship. Maybe a new normal that begins to give us a sense of a society that is more equitable for all people. Maybe a new normal where all of us will be more deeply rooted. Yes, rooted. We might practice that rootedness in the midst of the chaos that we find ourselves in. We might plant our feet firmly and find ways to practice community together, dreaming together, hoping together, hearing the voice of God who creates a new thing. Let there be light, God says, separating light and darkness. Birds of the air, land creatures, humanity tilling the earth, and a new creation springs forth. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine that new normal, even in the midst of the chaos and unsettledness that we find ourselves in? The good news for us is that we have a God who understands where we are. And we have a story that recognizes this unsettledness that we find ourselves in. An unsettledness that might begin to breathe new possibilities for you in your own life. Yes, things are not okay right now. And we are having to find new ways to connect and to communicate and to be together, but yet it's not hopeless. Yes, absolutely. The patterns of life in your family and in your own being might have shifted and are shifting, but that's not the end. We will get through this time, and a new creation will ensue. The question becomes for us together on this day is, what do we do in the midst of this time? And do we begin to use this time to imagine, to connect in new ways, to begin to create and recreate, to maybe try some things, just like we in worship are trying this kind of thing. Maybe you in your life of work and in your life as a family and in your life as a neighbor begin to try some different ways of connecting and being together. Maybe we shake off the apathy that's so common when things are great, and we begin to see the movement of a God who's making a new normal all the time. for you, for your neighbors, for your family, for your coworkers, for the person you meet at the grocery store. People of God, I recognize the tension. I can still see those empty pews. And I remember thinking to myself, if this is the way I'm going to have to proclaim good news from now on, I don't want any part of it. And guess what I'm doing right now? Yes, I'm talking to you through a camera. And yet I know that this will be part of my pattern. And it's a good thing. Not by itself. Oh, don't get me wrong. I can't wait to see you in person and hug on you and hear your story maskless, right? And for us to be well again. Oh, absolutely. I look forward to that. But I know that for some of us, this will become an important connection from now on. An important way to live life together. And there are many other parts of this new normal that we might want to explore with joy, with peace, with imagination. May that hope begin to grow in you. A God who understands the chaos, yes, and yet a God who moves in that chaos. And by God's own word and movement, begins to breathe new life, a new day, a new hope for all of humanity into a new day. Let's dream together about this new normal and lean on a God who's still making all things new, creation and recreation before us each and every day. Amen.